Good afternoon and welcome to the Full Scottish on Sunday the 4th of August. My name is Brian Liddy and I'm joined today by Sandra White. Sandra, good afternoon.
Morning, Brian.
Hello there. And
Yeah.
Hugh Marshall, good afternoon from Wales.
Hello, how are you?
Good, thank you. So Sandra, you're a previous SNP MSP, and you're now committed to social justice, the rights of asylum seekers, and Palestine, having worked in a cross-party government committee. Hugh, you're the founder of the national newspaper in Wales and Talking Wales. So thank you again for giving up a fair chunk of your weekend for us. We really appreciate it. We'll start today's show again with our routine Ukraine update, and today is the 893rd day of the war in Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has praised his forces for hitting military targets inside Russia after his army reported several strikes, including on an airfield and an oil depot. I would like to thank each of our soldiers and all those who work in our defence industry for striking Russian airfields, oil refineries and logistics, Zelensky said in his daily statement. Kyiv has stepped up aerial attacks on Russian territory, saying it carries out the strikes in retaliation for the bombardments that Ukraine has faced since Russia invaded more than 2 years ago. Russian officials said Ukrainian forces overnight targeted multiple Russian regions with a massive drone barrage. Russia's defense ministry said in a statement that its defense systems intercepted and destroyed a total of 75 drones over a number of regions that lie on the border with Ukraine or not far from it, including Belgorod, Krasnodar, Kursk, Oryol, Rostov, Voronezh and the Ryazan region deeper inside Russia. Ukraine's air forces say Russia launched an overnight attack over its territory with 29 Shahed drones and 4 missiles. Ukrainian Air Defence shot down 27 drones over 9 regions of the country, Air Force Commander Mykola Oleshuk said in an online statement. Ukraine is calling for urgent investigation of an image widely shared online that says it's likely showed a Ukrainian prisoner of war killed and dismembered by Russian forces. Dmytro Lubine, the country's leading human rights official, has appealed to the International Committee of the Red Cross and the United Nations to look into the photograph, probably of a Ukrainian prisoner whose head and limbs were cut off by the Russians. In view of these horrific images, I have urgently appealed to the ICRC and the UN to record yet another human rights violation by the terrorist country, Lubinets said. Ukraine's Prosecutor General Andriy Kostan said an urgent investigation has been launched. Russian shelling of a residential area killed 1 person and injured 2 in a strategic logistical hub in Ukraine's eastern Donetsk region, the regional governor said. The average daily Russian casualties in Ukraine has fallen over the past 2 months from a conflict high of over 1,262 in a day in May, down to 1,140 in July. That's according to the latest intelligence briefing from the UK Ministry of Defence. Despite this reduction, the last 3 months have been the costliest for Russian forces since October 2022, based on Ukrainian General Staff reporting. The reduction in daily averages is likely indicative of Russian forces consolidating positions on the Kharkiv axis. Russia's casualty rate will probably continue to average above 1,000 a day throughout August this year as it continues offensive operations on a wide front from Kharkiv in the north to Robotyne in the south of Ukraine, according to the Ministry of Defence. Sandra, is there anything that's quite a lengthy report today, but is there anything that you wanted to highlight?
Well, there was 2 things I wanted to highlight, and I'll be quite brief. Some good news, obviously, for Ukraine, where they've won a gold medal in fencing, so that's good news, apart from what's happening, which is absolutely horrific. But I know we're going on to the next item once we're finished with this, but I just wanted to throw this in. If it does escalate in the Middle East, I wonder how much support the EU and the US, etc., will continue to give to Ukraine. I think that's something that has to be looked at. I think they have to keep a marker on that one. If they happen to become involved in the next item, we're speaking about, will they be able to continue supporting Ukraine? That's the two things I wanted to say.
Thank you, Sandra. Hugh, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think again we'll be discussing it later on with the current unrest that's going on, mainly in England and in parts of Ireland. But you know, it does appear that there is an element of sort of Russian involvement in the what's going on, and it just highlights the danger that Russian poses to not just the West, but just to democracy in general.
Thank you, Hugh. And as you say, the next item is the Ukraine update. Sorry, the Gaza update in Gaza in the Middle East, forgive me. So at least 39,550 Palestinians have been killed and 91,128 have been injured in Gaza since the 7th of October. It does seem that Israel wants to widen the conflict from Gaza to take on Hezbollah and Iran. So there were two major events this week. Israel announced the killing of a top Hezbollah commander in an airstrike to South Beirut. And Lebanon Foreign Minister said the attack came as a shock after Israel had assured them that they would only make a limited response. And then in Tehran, the capital of Iran, Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh was killed as Iran vowed revenge. He was right at the top of Israel's wish lists for people that they wanted to take out. So really we're asking about the consequences. If the conflict does widen, how far will it go and how is it going to end? Sandra, I'm going to come to you first on that, if that's okay.
Thank you, Hugh. And I know that Hugh will have a lot to say on this particular one as well. That's why I mentioned it to do with Ukraine, because I do think this conflict will escalate. We've already seen Russia becoming involved. They've sent planes and also weapons, into Iran, and they appear to be getting ready. It could just be a threat, which Iran has said before to Israel, but this time, obviously, the assassination of a top political leader in Hamas, who wasn't just a political leader there, he was obviously a diplomat as well, who was involved in the talks for ceasefire from this horrendous situation that we're in at the moment. So I think it will escalate. Nothing you say or do seems to be stopping Israel. Only in the past couple of hours, there's been a school where people were sheltering, was bombed, and there were casualties, obviously. While people were trying to help the casualties, Israel came in and said they had to evacuate, and they bombed that school another 2 times, so 3 times, and this is just in the last couple of hours, and then tents in the hospital where people were, sheltering there as well. They've bombed that also. I think if you look at the situation, well, we know it's been going on long before October, basically, but the situation obviously has escalated. Netanyahu is not going to stop. It's a complete genocide. It doesn't want peace, never has wanted peace. And I think that they will continue on, and I do think there'll be retaliatory attacks, and they will expect the USA, the UK, and the EU as well to become involved in a war which they have started in the Middle East, which, as far as I can see, has been the plan from the very beginning, because they want to annihilate Palestine and the Palestinians, and obviously the whole of Gaza, the Gaza Strip, which they have done already. And for the life of me, I just don't understand why any country is still giving them arms. It's just unbelievable the amount of people you read that out there, about what happened, Brian, sorry, what had happened there. I mean, I get very emotional about it because I've been there and I know the place quite well, particularly the Gaza Strip. I mean, you think that the whole thing has been destroyed. Israel is definitely looking for a war in the Middle East, and they're going to involve other countries in that too. And it's a pretty horrendous situation. And it's not just obviously Iran and Russia's involved now. You've got Syria, etc. as well. You've got countries round about. You've got Cyprus, even small island like Cyprus, where they're the refuel and their jets go there. So it's escalated beyond just that particular part of the Middle East, and I hate to think what will happen next, but I do think it will escalate.
Thank you, Sandra. And yeah, I went to you first because you know Palestine a lot better than I do. Certainly, I don't know about you. But Hugh, feel free to answer that first question, but I'll just add a second question into the mix. So, do you think is Gaza now going to, if the conflict escalates and widens, is Gaza going to be ignored the same way that Ukraine now is no longer centre stage on when it comes to the news?
Yeah, well, I think obviously, with the situation with the escalation, because obviously, and the sad thing is that all of this comes down to just an individual, Netanyahu, who is just will do anything to remain in power. So I think coming to thinking how can sort of Netanyahu be removed? You've got a cabinet, that is, mostly, sort of extreme to the right, and have got extreme views on things. And I just understand, so going into, taking out, one of the Hezbollah leaders, it's like beheading, one of the snakes on a, on a some sort of Greek serpent's head. You chop the head off, another one is going to sort of appear. So it's all about sort of shows of strength and to see, brinkmanship about what they can do. They're basically trying to antagonize, trying and get a reaction, because I think Netanyahu thinks that that's the only way that he can stay in power is by, sort of putting Israel under more threat, and it's mad. And I'm glad, to a certain extent that Harris in the US has shown, some sort of strength and standing up to, to what's going on. But it is a concern because obviously, Iran. I know that they have a moderate sort of, who's come in recently, but how will that change? Because they're all these authoritarian regimes. It's a small group of men who are running, Russia, Syria, Iran, and they're doing it for their own interest. They have no interest in the people or any cause. It's all about self promotion and just making sure that I don't know that the dictators. History has shown us basically they're all bonkers, aren't they?
Yes,
Can I
thank
even try
you.
and say that
Please.
I don't think Palestine, the situation in Gaza and Palestine, will be ignored. I mean, we're out on
No.
the streets every Saturday. There's people
Yeah.
outside stores boycotting them. We're out marching in the streets every Saturday. And I don't think it will be ignored. I think it will get even bigger, basically.
It
And
wasn't that
you
the
had
case
mentioned
with.
about
It wasn't that the
the
case with you.
countries who are doing this and propping them up. But surely it's about time the West got a bit of a bottle and basically
Mm.
said, we are not, selling you any more arms. I mean, to be able to compete in the Olympics when they're murdering people, even while they're
Yeah.
supposedly competing. South Africa, Russia, whatever you think of Russia, whatever it may be, they can't do it, they've all been sanctioned. And yet we've got this, and, deep down, and I've tried to find out, I'm sure others have as well, what hold has Israel got over the world, not just the West, over the world. And it's got to be stopped.
Yeah, but wasn't that the case with Ukraine when the war first started and before the conflict in Gaza? Everybody was out on the streets demonstrating and waving Ukrainian flags, and you really don't see that anymore. Don't you think the news will move on to the new escalating?
I don't think so. I mean, it could be, and Hugh's probably up next about the situation in the UK. I mean, that's like a kind of smokescreen, isn't it? So, and any laws they may bring out may have an effect on the protesters for Gaza. But I think you've got to remember, in 2014, you know, NATO, and they could have done something about Russia invading Crimea in 2014, but
Mm.
they didn't bother, and they let it carry on, and people sort of get used to that part. And then obviously they came in regards to, you take refugees from Ukraine, and we will support Ukraine. They had an opportunity to nip it in the bud, But they didn't. They didn't nip it in the bud. The only people that's doing anything and making any money out of that are the arms companies. People are dying for profit.
Yeah, okay,
Sorry
well,
about that.
no, please don't apologise, Sandra. It's excellent. Thank you very much. But yeah, okay, so we move on to, as we've been kind of talking, hinting about the next topic, which is there. So 3 girls died and others were injured in one of the worst attacks on children in decades in the UK in a Southport school. And this murderous event has been exploited to stake hate, violence, and attacks on the police. And I don't know, it's Hugh, and there's been talk in the newspapers of this possibly spreading to Scotland. Tommy Robinson has been tweeting about a knife attack in Stirling, which we don't know the full details yet, and hinting that it's an Islamist attack, but it doesn't look as if that is the case. What do you think? What do you have to say about that from your perspective?
Yeah, I think it comes back to the point that the I think the UK media have platformed the likes of Nigel Farage for years, and they've made sort of the reform mainstream and supposedly acceptable. You've had Lee Anderson, the Reform MP, sort of just constantly going about he wants his country back, and it is this just sort of nonsense, this glib, politics by phrase that they're just using in order to sort of basically line their own pockets. They don't believe in anything. It's just sound bites in order for them to be popular within some sort of cause. What we're forgetting as well now is those poor girls and families in Southport, who lost their lives. Some are still in hospital, and the survivors. They're going to live with the trauma of that event for the rest of their lives, and those families who've lost those children. It's horrific. But as we don't know the cause. We don't know what's behind it. We won't know until this goes to court in January. It would be wrong to sort of try and second guess what's going on. The facts are that after the incident, people took to social media to say that it was an immigrant, a Muslim, who had come in on a small boat, which is all part of the stop the boats mantra that the Conservatives have bought into as well. And it turns out he was a young Welsh lad whose parents had come to Wales some years ago, and then moved up to Southport. And it's incredibly sad, but it's just the fact that people are they're wanting sort of they want their country back, and they're taking to the streets. My family hails from Liverpool, and it's really, really depressing to see that a library and community centre that was set up to support and help the most sort of deprived people in that community was set alight. And these people, they say they're protesting. They're looting shops. They're stealing mobile phones. They're just using it as an excuse to go out and cause chaos. But it is depressing. But on the other side, there were protests called for, and I say protests, they're not protests. They're people looking to cause trouble in Wrexham and in Cardiff yesterday, and nobody turned up. So there was no, but there's still media reporting that because people said we're going to have a protest in Wrexham, we're going to have a protest in Cardiff, nobody turned up. The only people who did turn up were people who were opposing these people. So it is a minority, and we know, from the details of Sunderland, for example. We all saw the big, bald, fat bloke in the braces with the tattoos, who has been arrested yesterday or this morning. He was from Stoke, so basically it's this small group of, people who are linked to the English Defence League who are travelling around causing trouble and encouraging sort of youngsters who, just doing it for kicks. It's really sad. But again, I was listening to the police this morning. Change of government, you've got, reform and that, sort of wing of politics. You've got commentators like Darren Grimes, and even in Wales we've got Andrew R.T. Davies, who's leader Conservatives, who's been sort of stoking culture wars by making sort of false claims about halal meat being served in Welsh schools, and talking about two-tier policing. So, the response, a lot of this responsibility lies on the shoulders of these people who have basically peddled the false narrative for their own personal and political gain. And it's time we spoke out against these people and stopped platforming them.
Thank you, Hugh. There is a vile undercurrent of anti-foreigner Islamophobic rhetoric that's been leading British politics by the nose since before Brexit. And Hugh, you mentioned Nigel Farage, and Sandra, I don't know if you noticed, but in today's National there was a report saying that Hamza Yousaf has criticised politicians for adopting far-right language in their day-to-day working practice. Things like Suella Braverman talking about an invasion of immigrants when they're just trying to get to a safe haven here in the UK. Nigel Farage has been guilty of that kind of thing as well. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And you hit on, Brian, you hit on the word, it's Brexit. If you look back, I mean, unfortunately you reap what you sow. If you look back when the election was on, Boris Johnson, etc., you had the Tories and you had Labour and then you had Farage. And basically, both Tories and Labour bent over backwards to copy the language of Farage, which was basically, racist. And this is where it came from. And then you had Brexit. We want our country back. And these people, this is what they constantly chant. And I often wondered, what country do they want back? Do they want the so-called UK, which is 4 nations, or do they just want England back? I mean, there was a lady I saw on the Twitter or YouTube, whatever, who said it was like the Titanic. They put so many people on the Titanic, that's why it sunk. So therefore, that's why England is sinking, because they're bringing too many people in. And that's the level, unfortunately, what you're dealing with here. That level, that's what they think. And it's been an underlying current ever since Brexit, Brian. And Hugh mentioned the fact about the media. Absolutely. And I mean the BBC as well. I mean, Farage was on, 53 times or something like that. And you had others as well, right-wing, racist, and they gave them cover for it. And newspaper media as well. They gave them coverage, made it normal to be able to say these things. And people obviously just thought, well, that's fine, I'll say that. Now we've not been told, we call this gentleman, as you might call him that, in Glasgow anyway, we call him Manky Jacob, because he has always got the same jacket on and it's never been washed. Laxey, basically Tommy Robinson, as they call him in the papers, we call him Manky Jacob. Now he's putting on Twitter, get to Glasgow on the 7th September. And then everybody's saying, oh, well, we have to go there and make sure that they don't arrive, etc. Now, the council hasn't been told if they're supposed to be going to go to George Square or not. So do they just turn up? It's as if they want to incite violence, and that's what it is. But it's a very, very deep underlying current here, and it didn't happen in Scotland, it didn't happen in Wales, it happened in England and Northern Ireland. And they're both unionist in that respect. Very, very deep lying current in there, that they think Brexit to me has kick-started this. It's always been there, but it's never got the opportunity as it has just now. People like Farage and Tommy Robertson and the rest of them, they should be jailed. And another number of politicians, as Hamza said. They should be jailed for inciting violence. Look at the folk from the climate. The protesters there, 5 years in jail. And these people are looting shops and burning down schools, burning down a police station. There's got to get a grip on this before it escalates, because it will. I can't see it stopping, even though the police are there. The police seem to be completely outnumbered. And Hamza's, thank goodness, quite right to call it out, because They reap what they sow, and it's been the newspapers, the media, the BBC, and the politicians, and they have to be held to account.
Thank you, Sandra. Yeah, I think I'm right in saying that Hamza Yousaf, he's written to the Home Secretary, and he's asked that, I can't remember the exact technical expression, but he's asked that organisations like the English Defence League, it should be made illegal for people to join those organisations. But let's see whether that happens or not. And just going back to Farage, I just think it's incredible that, Sandra, you mentioned the role he played in Brexit, the run-up to Brexit, and he's now an MP. And that's despite there being a first-past-the-post system that's supposed to discourage that, small parties. But I suppose we better move on. So the UK economy, the Office for Budget Responsibility, I'll go back to the general election campaign was fought around growth and the economy. Both Labour and the Tories ignored the £18 billion black hole that the SNP constantly flagged up. And said that they would. So during the election, the SNP warned that Labour would need to borrow £18 billion or choose to raise taxes and bring back austerity. And as Sarwar said, read my lips, no austerity. But now Labour are shocked to discover, on top of the £18 billion that the SNP mentioned, that there's another £22 billion black hole, but they insist they'll still keep to Tory fiscal rules. And so, is it Sandra turn this time first? I can't remember.
Well, of course, Hugh was first there and I came in, so I don't know. It's up to you, Brad.
No, I think it is your shot, Sandra. So,
Right.
on you, and as you were a politician, an MP, we're talking about Westminster. So, you probably know more about it again.
Yeah, well, the worrying thing is that basically, we all know that obviously the Scottish Parliament gets a block grant from Westminster. We pay them, and they take X amount off, and they give us X amount back, which has been cut basically over and over the years by the Tories, and has continued to be cut by the Labour government. And we fought very hard in the Scottish Parliament to get some more powers, and particularly over social security. And one of the ones which we fought for was the heating allowance, cold weather payment, heating allowance, whatever you want to call it. And we won that argument, or maybe I don't trust the Westminster government. Maybe they knew this was on the cards. Who knows? The Tories might be going to do it anyway. So they said yes. Okay, you can do that. You can have the legislation for that. And now they're cutting the pension for pensioners. They're cutting that completely unless you're on pension credit. Now, a lot of people who are just above pension credit, above £2 even, can't claim pension credit. And even though we in Scotland have the coldest weather, we pay the most for our electricity, even though we produce more and it's sent down south. We will pay more for that, yet we will not be getting the heating allowance, basically. So they have done that. So what they're saying now is, Anna Sarwar, no austerity. Well, we all knew there was going to be austerity anyway, and that's one part of it. And now they're telling us, well, you can just mitigate it. But you can't mitigate everything. And for me, the situation with the economy in the UK, basically tax the rich, tax the companies, the energy companies, bring the money in from there. But no, they fell way back on that. And, I often wonder when people are going to get a bit of brain and listen, that they tell you all these things. And people in Scotland voted Labour. And once again, they've got Labour, which are just, to me, red Tories. And they've been proving that. So people are going to really suffer, really, really suffer. Apart from the fact that food prices are coming up. So the situation, I think, is pretty dire because they're doing that particular issue. And then, of course, you've got the two-child payment. What's next? Family allowance, is that going to be next? Pensions, we're still on that. WASPy, people, they're actually saying, well, you could pay that as well. But you can only put out so much. And also the other thing about the new power that we're getting for the payment for the heating is the fact that with the Barnett formula, Scotland gets consequentials from Westminster. Now, if that money isn't there because they're not paying out for the heating allowance, Scotland won't get enough money for us with the Scottish Parliament. Won't get enough money for us to be able to pay that. So where are we going to get the money from? Are we going to have to, I mean, they're already saying, well, you'll have to means test it. Anna Sarwar's already said that. Well, maybe you should look, what was it he said? This is a golden opportunity. It's a golden opportunity for the Scottish Parliament that we could means test to give the pensioners basically heating allowance. I mean, what about just giving us, letting us produce our own electricity and get a north grid in as well? That'd be a far better way of doing it, but no, they won't. So Scotland's going to suffer out of that one thing, but it's going to get worse again for the whole of the UK, obviously. But we're going to get hit twice, I would say, with this situation. I hope I made it a bit clear. I don't know.
Yes, no, thank you, Sandra. So Rachel Reeves says that she's going to make departmental savings and she's going to keep public sector wage increases at 5.5%. She's also going to keep the junior doctors' pay rise of 20%. She's cut money for roads and railways, which is your basic infrastructure that you need to grow the economy, and yet that's what they say they're going to do. So these are choices that Labour have made. She didn't have to make these choices. She's also setting up a value for money department, which sounds a wee bit like the Tories' Department for Common Sense. And then she also plans for there to be a COVID corruption commission. There's going to be a lot of public support for that, I'm sure, but will it be possible to get that money back? Labour also say there's going to be no income tax increases, no rise in national insurance, and no increases in VAT. So is she going to go for something like capital gains tax or inheritance tax or the money that the non-doms bring in? Or is she going to borrow more? Hugh, that's a really long and rambling question, but I don't know if you want to make a stab at it. But where's the money going to come from when Reeves delivers her budget?
She's going to grow the economy. She's obviously got some magic beans somewhere that can take a flatlining economy that is, sort of is struggling along. It is growing, slightly, but that's what they've said, and that's what she's going to stick to, apparently. But I think, it's their first big mistake. I think is, sort of taking on pensioners. It is, trying to give an impression of, look, we can make the tough decisions. But it doesn't have to be this way, because austerity's been proven to be, it was a mistake. It was, it didn't work from an economic point of view. And there are things that that she can do from a borrowing perspective to kickstart the economy. But it's this nonsense that she's discussing sort of the UK economy as if it's like a household budget. It's this conflation of things that confuses the public, and it does go back to a certain extent to what we were discussing earlier about the riots. It's the fact that there's a responsibility in the media here to inform people about the realities of the economy and economics. So how do you ensure that people are informed? So when people say things like Rachel Reeves is saying, she's saying things, where's the challenge, and how can people get to understand that there are other sides to the economic story? But we'll have to wait until October to see when the budget comes out. But the good news from Wales is we've got a Labour government at both ends of the M4 motorway, so everything's going to be fantastic, apparently.
Yeah, thank you, Hugh. And Sandra, just with that mention of infrastructure, I mean, the fact that Rachel Reeves has said that she's not going to fund railways or new motorways or anything like that, you need infrastructure to grow the economy, don't you? I mean, should she be doing what Biden did in America?
Well, basically, yeah, you do need infrastructure, but you talk about the media, Hugh had already mentioned people need to know. You talk to people there, they don't realise that the railways, ScotRail, the railways in Scotland have already been brought into public control. And that's mixed messages to get, because all they'll constantly do is really they talk about England and not about Wales or Scotland at all. So everything she's talking about in regards to all these new railways and all this not building them, not building tunnels, etc. It's really down in England. It's not up here. So if they would just make that clearer for us. But yeah, I think it has to be more localised in respect. It would create jobs if they were doing that. It would create jobs if they do it, but I very much doubt it if they would do it at all. But you have to get into the economy. You have to make sure that people are able to live a decent life and basically get a decent wage. I mean, I know they mentioned the fact about obviously people would get a decent wage. I'd like to see where they're getting that money from. But the big worry for me is it's this continuation of, and unlike Biden, well, America is mostly all privatised right enough, but basically what they're doing is they're bringing in more of the private sector. And if they bring more of the private sector, less money will get into the public sector. And she can talk a good game, but I don't think she'll even continue with that, Brian. I think it's just talk, 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 keep people on side. I mean, look at the situation with the doctors. They have, PAs. I mean, there's one lady who died because of a PA who'd only had 2 years training down. I think it was in Wales actually. I can't remember now. 2 years training. That was all, and the lady died because it didn't do the job properly. And yet the media doesn't push these kind of stories out. They've got to be told, basically what is going on.
Thank you, Sandra. Hugh, I'm just intrigued about another one of the cuts that Rachel Reeves said that she's going to make was to Boris Johnson's 40 new hospitals. I mean, we all know that that was a scam anyway, but there was a budget for that, and that's now being cut. I'm just wondering, as your news organisations, I mean, how have you been covering this from your angle?
Yeah, it's interesting because again, a lot of these things, like the hospitals, it was England only, and that's the other thing. Again, we go back to discussing, the issues with the media of people not understanding sort of devolved matters. So, when that discussion on Boris Johnson's, sort of money going, but I would imagine, as Sandra's saying, there probably were consequentials linked to that because health is devolved. So by cancelling that, I would imagine it means that whatever money was allocated to Wales on health spending and Scotland will go as a result. And I think that's why we need to have a reset and discussion around the Barnett formula and the funding, because we can't have countries like Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland reliant on decisions made in England as to whether Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland gets money to spend on things, rather than us being able to make the decisions to prioritise what we want to be doing in Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. So it's it's something we hopefully this is we've been looking in Wales, looking at the constitutional sort of future of Wales. We've had leading figures. We've actually had, sort of a discussion with recommendations that the Welsh Labour government support. But surprise, surprise, they're not priorities for the new Labour government in Westminster, because obviously there are more important things to deal with than democracy in places like Wales and Scotland.
Thank you, Hugh. And speaking of Wales and Scotland, there's been a lot of talk about, so we mentioned Anas Sarwar's Read My Lips, no austerity under Labour. If Rachel Reeves succeeds in growing the economy and doesn't put up taxes, then he's going to have a better chance in his bid for to become First Minister in Holyrood in 2026. But if Labour fails, then that's going to also affect his fate. So what do you think his chances are?
Well, obviously I would hope that he wouldn't become First Minister, but I think looking at the results there for the Westminster government was a complete shock. A complete shock. I mean, Glasgow was wiped out of SNP MPs. I think the party itself, has to get round the table and ensure that we're a wee bit, as far as I'm concerned, a wee bit more forceful, get the message across better, because I doubt very much if she will continue with that. I mean, we've got the situation with the pensioners. That's one thing, and that should be pushed more. But you've got to do it yourself because the media won't do it and respect it. So we've got that. We've got the two-child one. We mitigate that as well, and then if you continue on, what was it? There's a St Andrews University, I may be wrong if it's not Aberdeen, I think it's St Andrews University, who had put all this money into AI, etc., and looking at new technology. and was promised £800 million by the Westminster government. And they've drawn that, took that away now. Labour are not going to do that with them. So we need to pick our targets in regards to what Labour are actually, turning round and saying, yeah, we would do that, but we're not going to do it now. You've got Grangemouth as well. You've got the situation with Aberdeen with the oil. There's lots and lots of things there. I don't think they'll be able to do anything at all, Labour, but it's how it's spun. And that is the main, how the media spins it. And we in the SNP, they've got to be clever about this, got to be clever about it and make sure people know exactly what is being taken away from Scotland and put in relative ideas for the Scottish Parliament, for the next Scottish Government to take forward. I mean, there's one wee thing, and I know it sounds silly, but it's not silly to me or anybody that stays in Glasgow or the west of Scotland. You take the Clyde Tunnel, for instance. That costs Glasgow City Council, we as taxpayers, £10 million a year to tidy it up and all that stuff. We get no money whatsoever from a government because way back it's called a trunk road. Things like that. It's called a trunk road by Westminster. So we get no money for it at all. Yeah, it's very, very busy. Things that affect people's lives. We need to start using that. Sarwar, Farm said, is not capable. I mean, how can it be that you're talking about giving people a decent wage when, nobody raised it, well, certainly we raised it, but the press didn't even raise the fact that his own father's firm wasn't paying workers a decent wage, below, a living wage. And these things, this is what we've got to go over. I think it's all bluster. Well, certainly Sarwar's all bluster anyway. But we really need to get our act together in the SNP and make sure that we let the Scottish people know. And for that, we need to get over the media. Somehow, we need to get that message across.
Thank you, Sandra. I didn't know that about the Clyde Tunnel, and
I thought for years about it.
yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
And it's of no interest really, but I pass the Sarwar cash and carry on a daily basis. It's not far from where I live at all. But I'm tempted to kind of like widen it out a wee bit. We've got a couple of minutes on this just because I was tickled when Suella Braverman dropped out of the leadership for the Tory party, and I kind of figured that she probably dropped out of the leadership race because probably for the same reason that I've never agreed to play a tennis match with Andy Murray. I just know that I would lose. I wouldn't stand a chance. But I suppose what I'm thinking is how should whoever the new leader of the Tory party is, I want to ask you a different question now about Wales. Sorry, Hugh, what do you think about the Tory leadership party, the Tory leadership race?
Yeah, well, it's just, it's like sort of sticking your hand into a sack of rats and seeing which one comes out, isn't it? It's they're in a position where they're obviously weak because of the losses they suffered at the general election, which means that the pool is much shallower now for who they can choose. It does appear that Gendrick is going to be the favoured individual, but I think it's almost like taking over from Alex Ferguson, at Man United. I think it's going to take a while for the Conservatives to rebuild their brand. I think Reform, are eating into a part of their vote. It was interesting. There was some polling conducted recently in Wales, which shows that Plaid Cymru has closed the gap substantially on Labour. Labour support has fallen a lot in Wales. And I think a lot of that is going to, some of it's coming to Plaid, some of it is going to Reform. So what you're finding is, in Wales, Conservatives will be fighting for those Reform votes. And I think the same thing will happen in Westminster. Rather than sort of trying to be a broad church of what Conservatives used to be, sort of small state and support small businesses and entrepreneurship. I think that they're going down this sort of trying to pick up that 25%, 30% of sort of the well, English public mainly, but there are some in Wales and Scotland as well, unfortunately, who do have intrinsic right-wing views. But again, going back to what we just said before, it's because of how are they being informed? Why have they got these views on things? I think Sandra's making a great point. I think one of the big issues, and I think where devolution has failed to a certain extent in Wales and probably in Scotland, is that the levers to actually sort of make changes to people's lives aren't there. And so what can sort of devolved governments do to actually make people's lives better? And it is hard, because especially if you're just reliant on funding in the main coming from Westminster, and you're tinkering around the edges, it's hard to make that difference. So I think in future, for the sake of devolution, whatever political parties we come from, we need to sort of make the case of what can we do to actually improve people's lives, because that's why a lot of people are unhappy, and some people are rioting, whatever. It's because their lives are crap, and they want somebody to blame for that. But the blame lies with politicians at the end of the day, because they're the ones who've got the powers to change people's lives. And well, especially Conservatives last 14 years, especially in the last few years, they just stopped governing. They just gave up.
Yeah, and that thing about politicians are to blame. I mean, they make choices, and it looks like Rachel Reeves has chosen to continue austerity. Just, I'm sorry for that brain burp of mine earlier on, Hugh, but the one, if you could answer really quickly, I wanted to ask you if the same situation applies to Wales, to the leader of the Labour Party in Wales, as applies to Sarwar. Is their fate going to be sealed in the Senate, depending on how Labour does in reversing?
It's going to be a massive, because basically they won the election in Wales. Their vote share went down 4% from what they did previously under Corbyn. So even though they won those seats, they won more seats, and they won the majority of seats in Wales. And Wales is now conservative free country from an MP point of view, because people shifted to reform. So it wasn't a Labour victory. Labour won by default. The Vaughan Gething, who is standing down as First Minister following sort of recent sort of scandals. Eluned Morgan is going to be anointed as the new First Minister on Wednesday. And basically, she's taking on a tough job, because I think people, in Wales, they've been at it for 25 years, and people are now starting to think, they're fed up. Vaughan Gething has done so much damage to the Labour Party in Wales, and people just aren't seeing, the difference that a Labour government in Wales is doing to their lives. But they've now been promised at this general election, with Labour government in Westminster, with a Labour government in Senedd, in Cardiff, that things are going to be different. So if they don't deliver change in the next 2 years, and it's going to be hard to see how they can do any sort of major differences in 2 years, it's going to be in a sticky wicket. But Plaid Cymru and the other parties need to up their game to actually offer people a genuine alternative, and not based on false hopes. They have to be able to promise things to improve people's lives that, as a government, a Welsh government, they can actually deliver.
Thank you, Hugh, and now, and I accept all responsibility for this. We're really tight at time. We've only got 5 minutes for each of the two
It was an interesting
items.
conversation, though.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, but moving on to the US. So Kamala Harris, it seems, has really shaken things up in the US elections. The Democratic Party, it looked like they were definitely going to lose when Trump narrowly missed assassination. And so Trump's Republicans, I think Europe and possibly the US have now heaved a huge sigh of relief now that Biden has stepped aside to let Kamala Harris to become the on the running order. Hugh, it's definitely your turn this time. I made a special note, but would you mind if I passed, because you got extra the last time? I'll pass to Sandra.
Go on.
Thank you, Hugh. Thank you, Hugh.
Tell you about Sandra.
Yes. What's your view on what's happening in the US stateside?
Well, I'm glad that Trump is on the road out. I didn't think he would win, basically. And I'm pleased it'll be Kamala Harris. I honestly thought that Joe Biden would perhaps just tinker along, whatever you want to call it, tinker along, or basically he just wasn't fit. But I thought perhaps he was hanging on because, and then once he got re-elected, he would pass the reins on to Kamala Harris because of the racial situation in America. But I'm pleased that no, she is, obviously the front runner, and I'm pleased that she's going to get it. I hope she makes some changes. Basically, it's a hard gig, obviously. America's such a huge country, but I think she'll be accepted on the world stage, as you might call it, obviously more so than Trump. So I'm hopeful that she will do some things a wee bit different. She's already looked at various things, particularly to help poorer people, insurance, that type of thing. So yeah, I'm pleased that she is, and I'm sure she's going to win it. And I'm pleased that Biden has stepped down. I thought it was a bit of a shame. Maybe he just said he wanted to continue, but it felt as though he was being dragged out when the man was very unwell as it was. So yeah, I've got hopes. That's about all I can say. But I'm pleased she's going to get it anyway, and I hope she does some of the things she says she's going to do.
Thank you, Sandra. Hugh, I'm just wondering if do you think what are her policies going to be, or in the run up? Do you think she's going to stick to what Biden campaigned on, as if to keep him in the race by saying I'm not going to change anything because Biden was going to be a great president second term? Or do you think she's going to do something different and make it her own campaign?
I think, obviously she's going to bring her own sort of take to things, but I think basically the Democrats have got a philosophy, and it's not that radical, but it's something that they're likely going to stick to. It'll be interesting to see who she picks as a running mate, and I think we'll know in the next week who that will be. But clearly, she's energizing and mobilizing things, because as Sandra was saying, Biden, it was just, there was no way that he would have been able to beat Trump, because he was just a sitting duck, especially for the type of campaigner that Trump is. And you can see that Trump now is literally running scared, because you've got somebody, Kamala is I think 59, so sort of, as somebody who's slightly younger than that, but it is quite, she's a very youthful individual, and I think that she reflects a lot more of people, I think, in the United States than Biden did. So I think it's positive, and I'm planning on going out to the States for the week of the election to take it all in. So hopefully I can be talking Wales and broadcast Scotland's roving reporter in the United States for the election.
That would be great. I'm sure we'll you'll find that offer sort of, yeah, they'll bite it off. I'm sure here at Broadcasting Scotland. Just really quickly, Sandra, I was thinking about when people saw how doddery Biden was in that debate with Donald Trump, and it filled the news, and now he's stepped aside. And yet, Trump's equally sort of, he's like me, he can rarely complete a sentence and says really strange things. Why hasn't he faced the same kind of backlash and been asked to step aside?
Um, I think they were his own. He was their only hope. I was going. I mean, Biden. Obviously, completely, whether it was Alzheimer's or something, you could see. I mean, he was going on the wrong plane. He was going the wrong place, and all that. And Trump's always just blathered on. But I think in the last 10 days, Trump is showing signs of similar to Biden. I mean, he's forgetting his words. He's going off tangent on this. I think he's actually got worse in the last 10 days. Is it the stress, the pressure that's made him worse? I mean, who else are they going to have? They've touted Trump for so long, pushed him on and on and on. They wouldn't change him. Basically, I mean, I've got a friend that stays in Florida, and she says they love him. They love him over there for some reason in certain states. They love him, basically. So it takes all kinds, I suppose. But no, I just think it went on for too long. Who are they going to bring in instead of him anyway? Too late as well. And lots of people wanted Trump to be there. They actually believe everything he says. That's America for you.
Yeah, thank you, Sandra. And we really are up against it now. We've only got 5 minutes now before the show ends, but the BBC will be fine. The BBC hit the news this week after Hugh Edwards pleaded guilty to possessing child porn. This follows the BBC annual report, which found over 50% of viewers in Scotland think the BBC does not reflect their lives. So Hugh, as somebody who owns news organisations, how do you hope to reflect people's lives better than the BBC, or do you think this is accurate description?
It's just a really sad situation. I knew who personally, and I think it all came as a shock. And where I live in Cwmgarw, the Garw Valley above Bridgend, is where Hugh Edwards' parents lived. Grandparents lived. So his father lived here, and he often visited the Garw Valley. So we have a park up the Calonlan Park, which was opened by Hugh Edwards. So there's a plaque there that will need to be removed. But yeah, but it's sad, when these things come out, because like I say, I see the BBC now having to go through the archive and sort of removing, sort of him from everything. So and the fact that he was the voice of the coronation and the funeral, that's going to be a challenge for them. And the most expensive TV series made by BBC Wales, The History of Wales, was presented by Hugh Edwards. So I think it's just it's sad, but you can never. It just goes to show you can never judge a book by its cover.
Thank you, Hugh. Sandra, we've got a minute. I mean, do you think this is going to impact on BBC Scotland in any way? Are they going to feel something from it?
Well, I think it should impact in all of the BBC, not just BBC Scotland. The fact of the matter is, we've had the Jimmy Savile one, we had Rolf Harris, we had various others, and now Hugh Edwards, who I admired when I saw him on the TV. I mean, as you say, you just don't know what's behind it all. But the fact that they knew about it when he was first charged, he was still on nearly £500,000 salary when they're asking people to pay a TV licence. And as we know, in Scotland, we don't get great coverage from BBC Scotland. And, the amount of people who are paying a TV licences is completely dropped by a huge percentage here in Scotland. So I think it'll have a knock-on effect, this particular one, particularly the fact that they knew about it and it was a serious, charge, but they still paid him his salary. I think it'll have an effect even more so than BBC Scotland has here just now with people. They don't trust BBC Scotland in Scotland. We don't get decent news. So I think having that and the salary, it'll have an effect on the BBC here. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. Yeah, it's true. He was a national figure, and apparently he got a £40,000 raise recently as well. But that is it for this week's Full Scottish. So I just want to say thank you to Hugh and to you, Sandra, again for giving up a huge chunk of your weekend.
Thank you.
No, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Well, that is it for this week's Full Scottish. But before we go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. That's you, our viewers at home. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. Right now, we urgently need to increase our donations if we're going to be able to pay our bills. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but we only receive £2,000 in donations. Please donate whatever you can afford. So thank you to you at home for watching, and thank you to our guests here in the studio, to Sandra White and to Hugh Marshall, and to you at home. So goodbye and thank you for watching.